Hey people, so as you may have guessed by now, I kind of like making things. Be it a key blank for a warded lock, like this one that I put together more recently, or maybe even a fancy tension tool, like this Finch tool, named after Jerry Finch, who was, if you don't know, the guy who came up with the idea. Or even a little bodgy snap gun, like the one that you see before you, made out of piano wire. Or even, drumroll, a Medicoder. The parts required to make this are not so hard to come by. Basically some piano wire, as you might be able to see down here. A bit of brass tubing, and a little bit of a knife handle for these types of cutting blades. And that's all I really needed in terms of materials. This bit of piano wire basically goes in where the blade part would normally go. There's a little bit of a hook on the end of the piano wire, and about the only thing I did to this was put this little line through here, which I'll explain later. And with the brass tube we simply cut out this little observation window, some more markings on the side which will be explained, and this little cutout on the end here. And that's pretty much all the work that needs to be done. There is a bit of measuring to do though. Okay, so very quickly we have a little piano wire hook at the end here, which is thin enough to allow us to slide this into the lock and hook into that little side channel in the side pins. And by pulling this backwards and forwards, we can thus rotate the pins with inside a Medeco lock. Now, in the middle here we have a little bit of a gauge. Now that gauge helps us to discern not only what pin it is that we are working on, but once things are lined up correctly, it lets us know that we have rotated that pin to the correct position that will allow the sidebar to push back into the plug of the lock. Now also up the front here we have this little cutaway, and the idea of that cutaway is simply to allow a tension tool to be in the lock at the same time as the tool itself. And just to show you that cutaway, how it works, as you can see we've got a tension tool in the front of the lock, and that allows us to have this tool pressed up against the front of the lock and not interfere with the tensioning of the lock. So in terms of making measurements, I cheated a little bit. I used the plug, and in particular these little holes or slots that you see here in the side. Now those slots are the points at which the fingers on the sidebar slot into, allowing the sidebar to be pushed into the plug, allowing the core to rotate once the correct key is inserted. For example, here we have the hook slotted up into position number 2 in this little sidebar section, and if you look down here we have these 2 marks lining up. So if we were hooked into a pin and we were rotating the pin, once these lines came together like so, we would know not only what pin we were working on, which we'd know anyway, would also let us know that the pin had been rotated correctly. And once all of these have been rotated correctly, the sidebar would then be allowed to push into the side of the plug and then allow the plug to be rotated to open the lock. So just to back up a bit, when I was talking about hooking into the little slot in the side of the pins, I'm talking about this slot here that you can hopefully see. as I hope you can tell, that the end of the bit of piano wire slots up into that little channel in the side of the key pin, and by hooking into that little slot it enables us to grab a hold of that pin and pull it backwards or forwards, and thus enabling us to rotate the pin to where we want it to be. Okay, and about the only other little thing I've done here is put this little line down here, and what that basically does, it just lets me know that once that is in the center of the viewing window, that this little hook at the end here is pointing upwards. Not really necessary, but I figured in case I get lost, it might be nice to know what the hell I've done and where I am with inside the lock. And so there you have it. That is my low budget Medicoder that I whipped up together here with just a few bits and pieces that were laying around. So full props to John King for coming up with this very, very cool idea. That's how I discovered that this thing existed and learned about how I could perhaps approach making one. So if you want to know more about John King, and you want to know more about the Medicoder, and you want to know, well, let's say you want to see one in action, I suggest that you do a little bit of a search on YouTube and look up John King. So all of that being said, it's time for me to bugger off and go and get busy doing some other things. So peace and respect to all. Wish you all the very best. And if you're in need of a tool, or you're in need of something in general to help you along with your lock play, have a go at making it. You might just surprise yourself what can actually be done. Bye for now.